Thanks so much, Erin. It's really great to be back here. I'm still the same gender as I was last year, so I don't know if that's okay or not. But it really is, this is an incredible place to be, and I was delighted to be invited back. It's it's an honor. I'd like to read I have a cold, so if you can't hear me, don't be polite, let me know. I'll do the best I can. But I'd like to read the first two chunks of the book. One is very personal, and the other is, sort of gender transition from a very, very internal standpoint, and the other is the opposite. It's gender transition from a very external standpoint. And then I will be happy to hear any kinds of, anything people want to say or talk about there. Please don't worry about scaring me. I am happy to, really delighted when people have the courage to ask questions and say things. And if I don't feel like I want to speak to something, I'm fine with that. But I think it's really important. We don't really know how to speak about transgender stuff or how to speak. There's no sort of book of etiquette for talking with trans people. So it's really important to take the risk and just kind of say what's on your mind, and we'll figure it out. So the first section is called A Blessing. Every day I say a blessing in Hebrew over my medication. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, who has kept us, preserved us, and brought us to this time. That blessing is traditionally said at the beginnings of holidays, on the eating of new kinds of fruit, and at any joyous occasion at which Jews want to heighten their sense of gratitude by becoming mindful of the singularity of the moment and the precariousness of the lives that have brought us to it. It's not said on the taking of medication. It is specifically not to be said over daily events, for which there are different blessings, and it's never said over a disease. The medications I take, progesterone tablets which I swallow whole, and sweet circles of estrogen that I dissolve under my tongue, are synthetic versions of the powerful hormones that naturally define and regulate many of the physiological characteristics of normal female bodies. I don't have a normal female body. Born without the capacity to produce more than trace amounts of female hormones, for decades my body instead has produced testosterone, masculinizing my face, bones, muscle, hair, and skin. Though there are few aspects of my physical form unravaged by testosterone's effects, thanks to my medication, those effects are diminishing. For the first time in my life, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who has begun to resemble me. I never thought I would see myself in the mirror. I never thought I would hold the means to become myself in my hands, that I would taste it dissolving under my tongue. Every day that I take this medication brings me slowly, very slowly, for there is so much to change and my body is so reluctant after all these years, slowly closer to being the person I have always paradoxically wished to become and known myself to be. At a stage in life, middle age, when many face the facts of mortality, I'm experiencing rebirth, or at least readolescence. This perhaps is only fair, since I spent so much of my life as a ghost, haunting a body that didn't feel like mine. Rather than embodying my identity, my body erased me, proved that I couldn't exist. Now, every day, my body and I move closer toward belonging to each other. This transformation is more than physical. As my body learns to metabolize and distribute fat according to female rather than male patterns, I'm learning to live and to be alive. The sophistications accumulated over 4.5 decades, the blasé attitudes, the taken-for-granted mechanics of daily life have all fallen away. Consumed by the ravenous insecurities of adolescence, I'm shy, awkward, always verging on the inappropriate, a maelstrom of feeling and need, fear and excitement. The first time such identity-forming growth spurts happened, I was an infant, then an adolescent, too young and too caught up in the painful processes of becoming to register them as miracles. I've watched those processes as a parent, but I never expected that one day I would be watching myself learn to walk and talk again, to say hello to grown-ups, to order in restaurants, to shop for clothes, to make friends. All this has become new again. Going to work, riding a subway, making a business call. Each experience has become an adventure, uncomfortable, unpredictable, brimming with emotion and discovery. But this newness is only the beginning of the blessings my illness has brought me. While I hid in the shell of my pre-treatment body, a body that, though monstrous to me, was accepted as normal by those around me, I felt I stood outside the human species, a species heartbreakingly beautiful and dauntingly strange, composed of creatures who belong to and with each other. I loved humanity from afar, passionately but impotently, giving little of myself because I had no real self to give. And honestly, what could I know of love when my every act and word presumed that I would be instantly rejected by anyone who saw through the shell of my maleness to the unrealized creature squirming inside? Myself was a tissue of terrors and lies, an automated, reflexive cowardice perfected as a child. If love is based on authenticity, I was incapable of it, for I had never lived a moment as my true self. And so it has come as a profound shock to discover, at the time of my greatest vulnerability, that I am surrounded by love. As I have become known to those around me, the people from whom I'd always hidden, I've been met again and again with compassion, acceptance, tenderness, a generosity of spirit that seems to have no limits. A few have embodied my worst nightmares of rejection, but my overwhelming experience has been to find myself in relation to the most loving human beings I can imagine. And because I'm once again at that awkward age, when every discovery breeds a new insecurity, a new possibility of failure, I feel dwarfed among these grown-up souls for whom loving and giving are as inevitable as breathing. Is it too late for me to learn to follow their examples? It's far too late to be asking such a question, but it's still too soon to answer. All I know is that I'm filled with love, too much love, love straining the cramped circumference within which I have always lived. Maybe this problem is the ultimate blessing. What, I wonder, will I ever do with all this love? Every day brings me closer to becoming the person who not only can, but must answer. And so, every day, when I take the medication that is making this possible, I say the blessing that registers the wonder and privilege of being, the awe and responsibility of becoming. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, she'achiyanu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Oh, okay. I thought it was like, transgender person on campus, quick! There we go. Oh, God has good sirens. This is called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Stern College. And it was a beautiful New York September day, sunny, warm, but not too hot, with a sky so blue it seemed to laugh at the hard-nosed realism of the skyscrapers thrusting into it. As I walked from Grand Central to begin the fall 2008 semester at Stern College for Women of Yeshiva University, I smiled into every face I could, eager to share the fact that miracles can happen. I was a miracle. My walk was a miracle. And even the most dubious citizen of this most skeptical of cities would have to admit that the job toward which I was walking was a certifiable miracle. I hadn't done much smiling since I began my transition from living as a man to living as a woman. Though my gender had felt wrong as long as I can remember, I'd grown up as a more or less normal boy in upstate New York, graduated early from high school, and went to Sarah Lawrence College in search of people who were as obsessed with poetry and intellectual conversation as I. During freshman orientation, I met the woman with whom I'd spend the next quarter of a century. After graduation and a few weeks on the cheap in Europe, we moved to San Francisco, got married, and shared a decade of bad apartments and young writer angst while I worked at the State Bar. Eventually, I went back to school in search of a career as a poet. My MFA in creative writing led to a PhD in American literature and the life of a wandering academic. I finally landed a tenured track job at Stern. Oddly enough, they needed to hire a man to diversify the department. But that enabled me to combine my love of writing with my love of Judaism. As I struggled to write and publish enough to complete degrees, get jobs, and earn tenure, my wife and I had 3 children, a son and 2 daughters. There's enough CV stuff. Early tenure had been my goal since I started my PhD. It was the only way I could imagine supporting a growing family and mortgage-sized student loans. But by the time my second book of poetry was published, enabling me to apply for tenure, my anxiety about mounting debt was eclipsed by a different kind of fear. The transsexuality I had fought to hide since I was a child was slowly making life unlivable. Unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything but gender, which is not very interesting to think about all the time, I knew that it was only a matter of time before I could no longer live as a man. If I didn't get tenure and the protection of lifetime employment before my transsexuality became apparent, I'd be out of a job and my family would be out on the street. Stern is the Women's College of Yeshiva University, modern Orthodox Judaism's premier institution of higher learning, and Orthodox Judaism, like most traditional forms of religion, considers the things transsexuals do to fit our bodies to our souls to be sins. In my case, those sins included wearing women's clothing and taking hormones that destroyed my fertility. I was also violating customs and conceptions of gender that, while not mandated by Jewish law, are held to with religious conviction by many Jews, and that, I was sure, would make it impossible for Yeshiva University to continue to employ me. Tenure came just in time, in June 2007, after a semester during which I struggled to get through classes without either sobbing or passing out. Although tenure was the triumphant culmination of my 15-year fight to establish myself in academia, it didn't make me happy. My gender identity crisis had destroyed my marriage, shattered my family, and turned me into an unwelcome stranger in my own home. Within weeks, I'd moved into the first of a series of rented bedrooms. My children were grief-stricken, angry, and baffled by the double blow of losing their happy family and the strange transformation of the father they loved. A couple of weeks after receiving tenure, I wrote to the dean, explaining my transition. Stern's response informed me that although the school would keep me on the payroll, I wasn't allowed to set foot on campus. My involuntary research leave, as the university called it, was the best funded and most courteous form of discrimination imaginable, but it was still discrimination. Cut off from students I loved, expelled from the vocation I'd worked so hard to master, I felt wounded in a way that was hard to explain. I couldn't shake the sense that my expulsion was my fault, that I was too repulsive to be seen on campus. As so many transsexuals have found, the world exacts a steep price, home, family, friends, job, for the dream come true of becoming ourselves. But just as I'd begun to accept that my exile from Stern was permanent, a miracle happened. When my attorneys demanded that I be allowed to return to teaching for the fall 2008 semester, a demand they expected to be rebuffed. They had, visions of Supreme Court precedent-setting cases. They were really excited. But unfortunately, the university said yes. In fact, they said, yeah, of course. Why did you think otherwise? It was weird. We spent the summer negotiating conditions, including which bathrooms, single-stall unisex only, I would be permitted to use. Finally, September arrived, and with it, my first happy day in a long time. After years of hiding and pretending, I was finally going to stand before my students and colleagues as the person, the woman I knew myself to be. More importantly, after centuries of intolerance, an institution representing Orthodox Judaism was about to welcome an openly transgender employee. As I'd done when I was a man, I took the train to Grand Central and walked the 10 blocks south to Stern. The revolving glass door spun symbolically as I passed through it. For a moment, the long, hard road from the man I wasn't to the woman I was seemed to be a circle, sweeping me back to the life I thought I'd lost. The escalator elevated me past laughing, smiling, chattering students, none of whom gave me a second glance. They weren't being polite. Even those who'd known me for years as a man didn't recognize me as a woman. Usually it's students who worry about passing. Today it was me. Their indifference proved that they saw me as a woman rather than as a man trying to look like one. I checked my mail, ducked into the single-stall handicapped restroom, adjusted my clothes, necklace, and makeup, and charged up 7 flights of stairs to the floor where I worked and taught. My office was heaped with the same stacks of papers, but the name on the door said Dr. Joy Ladin. It was a miracle. I, the real me, was here in plain sight. I walked through the halls, waiting for my transition to matter to someone. It didn't. Teachers rushed to and fro, students talked on cell phones or swayed back and forth in prayer. People pray in the hallways at my school. Everyone had more important things to do than think about my gender. I couldn't believe it. Here, in the heart of Orthodox Jewish world, a trans woman was neither a curiosity nor a monstrosity. I was just another middle-aged woman going about her business. But to the New York Post, I was news. I had known that the Post was going to write about my return to Stern. The author of the article was a former student of mine, and though I refused to speak to her on the record, she'd shown me a draft, a thoughtful look at the process that had led to Yeshiva's decision to allow me to come back to work that wouldn't have been out of place in the Times. The article said appropriately little about me. After all, I wasn't news. What was news was Yeshiva University's acceptance of me. So when a Post photographer met me outside the school, I smiled and turned away to the comforting work of academia. The published article, splashed across page 3, complete with before and after pictures, no longer bore any resemblance to anything in the Times. Quotes, "A Yeshiva University professor left 2 years ago as a man and returned last week as a woman. Literature professor Joy Ladin, formerly known as J. Ladin, 47, showed up for her first day of school sporting pink lipstick, a tight purple shirt, and a flirty black skirt. Many at the Jewish University are horrified by the presence of the transgender professor. Some fear the news could cut alumni donations, the ultimate horror in academia. My shirt was purple, my lipstick pink, and my skirt black, but the claim that the shirt was tight and the skirt flirty turned out to be quite controversial, with lively internet debates among Orthodox Jews over whether, as the Post implied, I was immodestly dressed. But even an immodestly dressed female teacher at Stern wouldn't make page 3 of the Post, unless she, like me, had previously taught there as a man. Yeshiva, the headline gleefully shouted, spawning the first of many wit-challenged headlines, putting the oi back in joy. Joy returns, but all are not joyful. The Post's quasi-literate sniggers weren't surprising. Cross-dressed men have been staples of Western humor since time immemorial. The Post's before and after photos and the article's assertion that I had, quotes, retained the most prominent part of my manhood ensured that readers would get the joke, or rather would get the idea that I, as a transsexual, was something to laugh at. Thanks to the miracle of the internet, Jews and non-Jews around the world were able to chortle over and weigh in on the spectacle of my return. Rabbis gave sermons about me in yeshivas in Israel. AM DJs around the United States ruminated on whether I looked like a real woman, or babe, as one of them said. Newspapers as far away as Vietnam and China kept their readers apprised. Bloggers and online commentators held forth on everything from the quality of my character. Many, including a neo-Nazi group, agreed that I was a coward for waiting to come out until I had tenure. And when you've been dissed by neo-Nazis for not having moral character, that's really terrible. To the quality of my sandals. The consensus was that they were ugly but looked comfortable. But even for the Post, the joke of transsexuality is stale. Few New York area transsexuals make tabloid headlines. What made my story newsworthy was the incongruity of a transsexual, the quintessence of a secular individualism that says we're all free to define our identities, teaching at an institution for which identity, including gender, is defined in terms of divine law. Transsexuals and Orthodox Jews. What could be funnier? Orthodox Jews, of course, weren't laughing. Neither were members of the trans community, who were appalled by the Post's dehumanizing portrayal. Though Yeshiva University maintained official silence about me, the Post found a faculty member. He's actually famous as the go-to guy in the press if you need a trans or homophobic quote. Most people won't give them anymore, but he's happy to. That he was willing to voice Orthodox horror at my presence. Rabbi Moshe Tendler, who, as the Post noted, is a senior dean at Yeshiva's rabbinical school and a professor of biology and medical ethics, didn't mince words about me. He's not a woman. He's a male with enlarged breasts. He's a person who represents a kind of amorality which runs counter to everything Yeshiva University stands for. There is just no leeway in Jewish law for a transsexual. Rabbi Tendler's comments suggest as startling, for a professor of biology and medical ethics, ignorance of the complexities of gender, and, as a number of Orthodox commentators noted, they violate Jewish laws that require that individuals be spoken of with respect. A number of Orthodox Jews publicly distanced themselves from his remarks. Others applauded his willingness to publicly state that there's no place for a transsexual in traditional Judaism. Much as I'd like to dismiss his remarks as ignorant and narrow-minded, the fact is that they represent feelings that are alive and well among Jews and non-Jews alike. However inappropriate in tone, his comments crystallize issues raised by transsexual transition and the attitudes faced by transsexuals inside and outside the Jewish world. The first issue, of course, is what exactly someone like me is. A woman? A male with enlarged breasts? Or something that explodes traditional definitions of gender? That question can be hard enough to answer in secular contexts. To this day, my children argue about what to call me, although daddy is what they've settled on. And no matter how trans women look or live, the Social Security Administration won't acknowledge us as female until we present written proof of gender reassignment surgery. But no matter how confusing my gender identity might be, my children still consider me their parent, and the government accepts me as a citizen. Gender identity is so central to tradition-based communities such as Orthodox Judaism that it's more or less impossible for those communities to accommodate people who can't easily be identified as male or female. For example, unmarried Orthodox men and women aren't supposed to touch one another. When observant Jewish men and women meet me, are they allowed to shake my hand? All of them? None of them? Some of them? Though people on the left tend to be less hostile than Rabbi Tendler when talking about gender, gender norms are embraced and enforced across the political spectrum. For example, Germaine Greer, the feminist writer, might be horrified to be told she had anything in common with Rabbi Tendler, but she's referred to trans women as, quote, ghastly parodies of women. The Orthodox Jewish question of who, if anyone, should shake my hand is mirrored in feminist debates over whether trans women should be allowed to attend women-only events and to appear in women-only groups and spaces. One prominent event, the Michigan Women's Music Festival, states in its ads that only those born female are welcome. But Rabbi Tendler isn't only worried about what I am. He's worried about what I mean. Gender is a language, a way we tell one another who we are and how we fit into society. For Rabbi Tendler, my presentation of myself as female didn't say that I was a woman. It said that I embrace a kind of amorality, because I reject the distinctions, and this gets back to the Garden of Eden that Aaron referred to, the distinctions male and female, light and dark, good and evil, that are the basis of traditional morality. If, as my transition proclaims, a man can be a woman, then there are no absolute distinctions, and thus no basis for moral judgment. Never underestimate the power of a tight purple shirt and a flirty black skirt. But I don't mean to be dismissive. I've agonized over the moral implications of transsexuality longer than Rabbi Tendler ever will. I started as a 6-year-old, tormenting myself for not being the boy my parents thought I was, and for not having the courage to tell them the truth. For decades, not a day passed when I didn't feel the secret shame of presenting myself as someone I knew I wasn't. I tried to be a good boy and man. I did my homework, took out the garbage, was faithful to my wife, and supported her so she could devote herself to her writing. I typed my dissertation with one hand while standing up and rocking our second child who had colic. In short, I was a good man, the very embodiment of what Rabbi Tendler would call a kind of morality. But for me, being a good man meant being a bad person. Every time I presented myself as a man, to my wife, to my children, to my students, to my colleagues, I was lying. I was being a coward, betraying the deepest truths about myself, choosing to live in misery rather than in the state of gratitude and joy that Judaism celebrates as the birthright and obligation of humanity. My transition didn't resolve the moral paradoxes of transsexuality. It just reversed the terms. Once I began living as a woman, I felt I was being honest and brave and living the only life I could live in gratitude and joy. But by ceasing to live as a man, I was destroying my marriage and my family, bringing grief and confusion to those I loved. According to Rabbi Tendler, Judaism can't help me negotiate this dense web of conflicting moral obligations, because to be a transsexual is to be automatically excommunicated. Quotes, "There is just no leeway in Jewish law for a transsexual. There is no niche where he can hide out as a female without being in massive violation of Torah law, Torah ethics, and Torah morality. Of course, Rabbi Tendler misunderstands transsexuality. I felt I was female before I transitioned, and since Jewish law governs actions rather than feelings, no leeway in Jewish law is required to be a transsexual. He also misunderstands the nature of my transition. While some transsexuals erase our former identities when we transition, I would never have returned to yeshiva, much less smiled for a photographer, if I was trying to hide out as a female. But Rabbi Tendler voices a fear that haunts devout trans Jews and other trans people who long for connection to traditional religions and communities. The fear that, to become whole in ourselves, we have to amputate ourselves from our religions, from our communities, from the deep wells of traditional wisdom that are the birthright of human beings who, unlike us, are comfortable with the gender into which they've been born. But Rabbi Tendler is wrong. Those who feel that Torah law and other wisdom traditions offer transsexuals nothing more than condemnation might usefully remember Rabbi Hillel's famous questions in the first chapter of the Ethics of the Fathers, a book of the Talmud. If I am not for myself, who will be? If I am for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, when? Hillel's questions confront us with the uncomfortable fact that, trans or non-trans, we all have to become ourselves, not just once, by growing from childhood into adulthood, but throughout our lives. Becoming can be terrifying. I avoided it as long as I could, and when my gender crisis made avoidance impossible, I felt utterly lost. It was easy to find information about medical treatments and social retraining necessary for people born and raised as men to act like and be seen as women, but I didn't want to simply act like and be seen as. I'd done that all my life. I wanted, after decades of being a persona, I wanted to become a person. And so, like generations of Jews before me, I looked to Hillel. His questions transformed what seemed to me metaphysical impossibilities into concrete choices. If I am not for myself, who will be? Hillel didn't have to know anything about transsexuality to know that the answer to that one is no one. No one expected me, needed me, or even wanted me to become myself. In fact, my family clearly needed me not to become myself. My journey toward becoming a person could begin only with a radical act of being for myself. That seemed selfish, solipsistic, even psychotic, for I would have to be for a self that didn't yet exist. But Hillel showed me in the plainest possible terms that if I wasn't for myself, myself would never be. Hillel's first question leads inexorably to his second. Being for myself was only my first step toward becoming a person, because if I'm for myself alone, what am I? Over the years, I allowed myself moments of being for myself, of relaxing guiltily, rigid, it was religious, but it was also rigid, that ensured that I would always sit and walk and talk like a man, and instead to feel for a second like the girl or woman I knew myself to be. But those episodes were few and far between, and they always left me feeling empty. They didn't transform me. They seemed to prove that I had no self to become. Hillel wouldn't be surprised. We become ourselves with and through other people. My sense of myself as female was a private matter of being for myself. But being a woman is much more than a sense of being female. It's more than wearing certain clothes or sitting in certain postures, more even than having certain chromosomes and reproductive organs. Women remain women even after double mastectomies and hysterectomies. Woman designates a social status, the achievement of a mature female identity in the world. When I was for myself alone, what was I? A wish, a longing, a perversion, a disappointment. No matter how fiercely I insisted that I was female, if I wanted to become a woman, I had to remake myself in the eyes of others, to be for and with them as the self I felt driven to become. But Hillel's question is more than a call to come out of the closet. It's also a demand that we take responsibility for the consequences to others of our becoming. If I cannot be for myself alone, if I need others to become myself, then I can't ignore the pain that results from my becoming. However much I've suffered, myself and my life are no more important than the suffering selves and shattered lives of those whose destinies are tangled with mine. People I love are in anguish as a consequence of my transition, and unless I acknowledge that that anguish is as real as the anguish that drove me to transition, I will be for myself alone. And then, what am I? The fact is that the best moments of the life I'm making will always be intertwined with the worst moments of the lives of those I love. It isn't fair. It's not what I want or intend, but it's true. For most of my life, I tried to be for others without being for myself, to be the man they needed me to be. And once I began to transition, I wanted desperately to do the opposite, to insist that after all the years of self-denial I'd given them, their feelings didn't matter, to demand that they embrace and support the cataclysmic process of my transition. Hillel's question forced me to recognize that to become a person, a real person, and not someone acting like a woman, I had to be both for myself and for others, to be as true, as compassionate, as present to my family and friends as I was to myself. Being for myself, being for others, it all sounds very static. Being, after all, is the most minimal possible verb. Hebrew doesn't even bother to assign a word for it. There's no word for is, no am. And that's why Hillel's final question, if not now, when, is so important. It reminds us that being demands becoming, that without constant, urgent, complete commitment, we cease to be. For most of my life, it seemed that the answer to, if not now, when, was never. My certainty that I would never be for myself or anyone else was so complete I couldn't even think of becoming as a process. I imagined simply waking up in a magical now in which I was suddenly a girl or a woman. And since I knew that could never happen, I tried to accept that I would never, in Hillel's sense, be. Once I made the difficult commitment to transition, once I answered the question, if not now, when, by saying, now, I expected to instantly become myself. But I didn't suddenly go from a life as an imitation man to life as a real woman. I had to create that now, the now of becoming myself, through innumerable, sometimes agonizing decisions, choices, and commitments. And as I made those decisions, choices, and commitments, I found that I was slowly becoming the self I'd waited my whole life to be. Not a self alone, but a self responsive and responsible to those around me. That process continues, for every day I have to answer the questions that are the essence of my becoming. Transsexuals' lives may seem strange, even bizarre, but the questions we face in becoming ourselves are the questions life poses to everyone. How can we become ourselves? How can we put the selves we are becoming into meaningful, moral relationship to others? And when we finally become ourselves, who will we be? Thank you. If it's okay with you guys, I'm going to sit down. So, yeah, I would love to hear voices other than my own. Even if you just want to say do, re, mi, fa, sto, I mean, lovely. So anything that you'd like to ask or say, I would love to hear. Yeah.
I know this may not be like an incredibly important distinction, but did you have like a surgical sex change? I mean, when you process a woman, did you actually have the surgery? Like some people have.
You know, that's a very important question, and it feels important to me not to answer it. But it's a question that people automatically ask for reasons that are completely natural. So I come here and I say, okay, I was a guy and now I'm presenting myself as a woman. And one of the things that gender is, and this is very bizarre, but when you recognize somebody as a man or a woman, you're like looking through their clothes, right? You're making assumptions about the most intimate facts of their bodies. We don't have a nudist society, so this is like a big deal, you know? And for transsexuals, it seems like we're making this whole thing public. And so the question, well, okay, so what are you actually doing to your body? What kind of body am I talking to? Is reasonable, because when we look at each other and classify, you know, people who are, cisgender is the term, I'm not crazy about it, but people who remain this one gender their whole lives, we kind of do that. And transsexuals often, because we don't usually have a sense of ourselves until we transition. Like when I transitioned, I didn't feel that I had a private self. Like I didn't feel I had a right to privacy. I didn't even really feel like I quite had a self. But I've come to realize that I do. and that it's important for people to realize that even though nobody actually, I think, says this maliciously, you certainly didn't. It's kind of like if you meet somebody at a party and meet a guy at a party and say, so, circumcised? Right? You're asking somebody you just met about their genitalia. And so I feel like it's sort of my job to publicly say, thank you for asking that. Here's why I'm not going to answer it. And there is a real, but you said you're not sure how important it is, and I think that that's a really good question. I think we're not sure how important it is. It's one of the funny things, transsexuals have to distinguish between gender, which is what we think of ourselves in terms of male or femaleness, and how we present ourselves. Those are two different things, gender identity and gender expression, and physical sex. But if you're not trans, you don't actually have to make that distinction. Your physical sex, your gender identity, and your gender expression, they're all part of a bundle. And it's strange to people, one of the many things that can be strange to people in talking with transsexuals is you're forced to make distinctions that you wouldn't normally have to make, and to say things like, well, yeah, how much does it matter to me what the genitalia of the people I'm talking to are? I assume that I always know, but in fact, we don't know. Like, there are guys who, have only one testicle, and I talk to them, and I talk to them as though they have two testicles. I just never adjust my conversation to that fact, and things seem to go fine. But it is odd, and I'm not sure. I don't want to give you an answer, because I think for some people it is actually a crucial question. When in Massachusetts, there's finally a non-discrimination law that includes trans people. But it doesn't include public accommodations, which is to say it doesn't include the bathroom. Like, I don't have a right to use the women's room in the mall in Massachusetts. And the reason is precisely because there are a lot of people to whom it matters a great deal. And partly it matters because male violence against women is quite pervasive. So, people who testify against these kinds of laws, some of them say, look, this is against religious tradition, or it's a perversion or something, but some people just say, look, I've got a daughter, and I don't want her going into a bathroom, and there's a guy in there, right? So women's rooms are spaces where women expect to be safe from male violence. And for a lot of people, if you let trans people into bathrooms, and you say, you get to define your gender and use whichever bathroom you want, it really raises some serious anxieties. And, I have two daughters. They're subject to male violence. I get it. So I don't want to presume to tell anybody how important it should or shouldn't be, but it's a great question. Yes. Or yes.
Hey, I was wondering if you could illuminate more how you resolved your identity as a woman born in a man's body, your transness within Jewish law, because I can tell that Judaism means a lot to you.
It does mean a lot to me, and I think I sort of caught a break there because I was born into a family that was, as the saying goes, not very Jewish. So what that really means is ethnically Jewish. We had a sense of being Jewish as a social identity, but not very much as a religious practice. I was, one of the many ways in which I was strange, and really there were quite a few, was that I was really into Judaism. Like, nobody in my family was, but I was attracted to it. I went to services, and I read the Torah on my own. And the congregation that I went to, most of the people who went to services were old men from Eastern Europe who didn't speak much English. So they would smile and say things to me that I didn't understand, and I would smile and pretend that we were talking. But mostly what I was getting about Judaism, I was getting from reading the Torah. And I read the Torah my way. So when I read the Torah, I saw God as somebody who was, quite a bit like I was, somebody without a body, who had some real social problems when it came to relating to human beings. And, we had to figure out, if you're invisible to people, but you really love them and want to be with them, how do you do that? So, talk about making God in your own image. So as a kid, that was my Judaism. And I paid attention to the other parts of it, but, I was also if you just read the Torah and you don't have all of the commentaries and people who are interpreting it for you, it's pretty clear that you're reading about the Bronze Age. You're reading about a couple of thousand years ago, and nobody does this stuff. There aren't, even among most Orthodox people, they don't stone rebellious children. They just don't do that. Nobody is going to do that, and I knew that. So I knew that there were large parts of this in terms of the law that were not operative. At the same time, there is only one reference that's kind of to trans people in the Torah, and it's not clear that it's even to trans people, but it says that a man shall not put on the clothing that belongs to a woman, and a woman shall not put on the clothing that belongs to a man, for anyone who does so is abhorrent to the Lord your God. And this is Moses talking in Deuteronomy. Moses says a lot of things. Moses is very fond of capital punishment and even prescribes capital punishment for entire cities in Deuteronomy. Moses' fantasy is that if you just kill the bad people, everybody will live happily ever after. And we know that doesn't really work out. But so it would have been easy to just sort of ignore that as like more crazy Bronze Age old man Moses stuff. But I didn't, because of the claim that I was abhorrent to God. And I felt very close to God, and a lot of trans children do. Partly I think it's because we don't feel in our bodies. And I think that a lot of what makes us feel far away from God is social identities and physical presence, right? And I didn't feel part of those things. It wasn't that I was an enlightened being or anything. I was really messed up. But I wasn't attached to a lot of the things that start to shudder and shake when you come close to God. That stuff wasn't me anyway. So another thing is that a lot of trans kids, and this is like people from all the religious traditions that I've spoken to, they feel close to God because God is the only person who actually knows who and what they are. And, God is our creator. So God not only knows who we are, but God actually made us who we are. And when you're little, it seems that God can sort of snap fingers and make us what we should be. So there's a lot of very intimate talking with God. So what I read in the Torah, I thought a lot about how God felt about me, and I felt very close, and that really disturbed me. And there wasn't anything that I could do about it. I mean, God was my only friend, and we had to keep hanging out together. So I don't think I ended up reconciling that, but as I grew up, I felt more strongly, and this is an ongoing process, I would say. I've come to feel that when I was a kid, I thought, well, a mistake has been made. I should have been given a different body. But now I'm coming to feel like I could only be the person that I am by going through this journey. And partly that's because my 9-year-old, she asks me these questions all the time. Why are you like this, Daddy? Why did you leave? Why did you do this? This is hard. Why did God make you this way? And finally I realized if I had been any other way, she wouldn't exist. A lot of things would not happen, but also me, the things that I've learned, the person that I've become, and the ways that I'm able to be in the world, I couldn't be those ways. So just sort of starting to reconcile myself fully to the idea that this maybe is the way I'm supposed to be. Yes.
Hi, my name's Lucas, and I just started hormone therapy about like a month ago, and so I have more of a direct question about your experience transitioning like later in life, especially, and I guess my question is just can you kind of like speak to the idea of identity, especially if you transition after building, and obviously you've been yourself forever, but building your life and your identity based on trying to assimilate into society as a male-bodied person and now being perceived very differently. How do you maintain a sense of like confidence in your identity, or how do you maintain that confidence, I guess, but it appears that you have. And just kind of speaking to the idea of not losing yourself in the transition, religiously or non-religiously.
That's like a whole bunch of great questions. But also, congratulations. That's fabulous in terms of your transition. So when I was at the beginning, where before I had done anything, before I'd started hormone therapy, and I was talking with my now ex, and we were living together as a family, and I was in therapy, we were eating at a local restaurant. We were having brunch, and it was pretty miserable. And it was in Northampton, which is near Mount Holyoke. Not Mount Holyoke, Smith. Smith actually had to change its gender policy because it had so many trans guys, right? People who were admitted as women and then they transitioned. So Smith finally said, okay, we're just going to get rid of gender from all of the school's roles because we don't know how to do it anymore. So the person at the next table was saying, yeah, I think I should transition now. I don't want to be one of those middle-aged people who waits and then screws up their entire lives and everyone around them. And I'm thinking, yeah, that would be me. So I did. I built a whole life as somebody that I wasn't. And partly that's, partly there were good reasons for it, and a lot of it was fear and cowardice and living in a society that didn't have much place for people like me. And I have mixed feelings, when I was a kid, I just wanted to transition right away. But if I had, my children wouldn't exist. And I can't unwish them. So as a parent, I look at my kids and, no matter what they tell me they want to do, I want to tell them, wait, try it out, think about it, don't do anything irrevocable. But when I was their age, I knew who I was, and I just wanted to become myself as quickly as possible. So I have kind of a double perspective on it. I do think that if you build a life around being somebody you aren't, that's building a house of cards, and people are going to get hurt when that collapses. At the same time, good came of my life as a man. There's no question about it. And my 3 children, if nothing else. But the piece of it that I want to speak to directly, and I don't know if it's going to be the same for you, is that for me, I think that all of us are we have identity is a ratio of a sense of being, who we are, a sense of existence, and a sense of becoming. And those are in tension with each other. And I think for non-trans people who have relatively stable lives, of course, there are a lot of reasons people don't have stable lives, even if you're not trans. Things can be pretty unstable for other reasons. But people have relatively stable lives. You think of being as most of who you are, and the becoming part is a relatively small part. There are times in your life, adolescence, where you change jobs, you graduate. There are times when suddenly becoming is a big deal. But for the most part, you think of yourself as being who you are. Identity is sort of an active imagination that says we are who we've always been, even though we know that's not true. We're all the same person. And mostly you have a sense of yourself as being, and there's a little bit of becoming mixed in. But for me, I think it's always going to be the opposite. I think I'm always going to feel mostly like I'm a process of becoming with a little bit of being mixed in. So that question about confidence in who I am, yeah, I don't think I score high on that scale. And I always sort of hope to become more than feeling like I can be confident that I am. And there are advantages to this because, in a lot of ways, like every human being, I have ways that I wish I weren't. So if I focus on the becoming stuff, there's always a possibility I end up better than I usually do. And the downside is that, there's a lot of being scared and just kind of anxiety about it. And I think it might be different for you because you're coming into yourself so much sooner. Yes?
I'm wondering how your family transitioned with you throughout this process, especially how they would refer to you. So to your children, say that they have 2 mothers, or was it a mother and a father? And then to your siblings, say they have a sister, or they still have a brother?
This is a great question. It's common among transsexuals to say nobody transitions alone. So part of the thing about identity is it's something we do with other people. Like if you're on a desert island, you're going to have a sense of who you are. But if you think about it, a lot of who you are is who you are with other people. And when you make a major change to your identity, and there are a lot of different changes, like one of the things that, I won't even get into this, but for a while when I was a guy, actually I would respond to gender breakdowns when I couldn't repress my transsexuality. I would respond by these penances that were sort of trying to reassert my control over myself. And one of those ways was to become more visibly Jewish. So by the time I transitioned, I was wearing a kippah and tzitzit, even though I wasn't Orthodox, which is a really strange thing to do. But when I changed my identity, the first thing that was visibly changed was it looked like I was changing my identity as a Jew. And my ex, who was at first horrified that she was walking around with a guy in a kippah and tzitzit, was then disappointed. It's like she ended up being proud, like, yeah, this is the one person in Amherst who's doing this. This was before the Chabad people moved in. So when we change our identities visibly, we sort of change the identities of those whose lives are bound up with us. And they do transition with us. That's part of why when marriages break up, when people transition, my ex has always thought of herself as a heterosexual woman, not as a lesbian. So the idea that she was really always married to somebody who was really a woman, that was not okay. And my children say, very clearly, it's like they don't have two moms. They didn't grow up with two moms. As far as their life story is concerned, and this is true, they have a mother and a father. My kids call me daddy. And they refer to me as he, and we have different sorts of discussions about that. I think that the degree of importance of my gender identity to them has changed, but my little one, she's 9, she doesn't want me to come into her school. She feels kind of ashamed about that, but also she just doesn't want to answer questions, because my identity then gives her something to come out about. Really? Why do you call that person daddy? What's going right? She's like, oh, give me a break. Can I just be friends with people and not answer those questions? So my sister, fortunately for her, sort of stopped having anything to do with me when I was 21. So I don't think my transition has affected her identity much, but if it has, I haven't heard from her about it. And my mother, I don't know. She has accepted me, and actually I would say we're closer since my transition, but she calls me Jay and refers to me as he. So it's hard to say if that's because she's in her 80s and it's like, she just can't readjust her thinking that way, or if it's because she really does perceive me as her son. So it's a bunch of different decisions by people. Part of what's been important for me to learn through my transition is that my insistence that people accept the truth about me, right? This is my true self, and even if it makes you uncomfortable, I'm presenting it to you, means that I'm obligated to do the same. So for my kids, the truth about them is they see me as daddy. That's who they see me as, that's who they love me as. And I realized, I want to be with them, and they need to be true to themselves, and I need to accept their truth. So it's uncomfortable. It's part of that having confidence in who I am thing. Like, my identity is still this fraught, tenuous area. And Lucas's, I would guess, is just not going to be that way. You're just going to be Lucas and to everybody, and that really will reinforce your sense of who you are.
Unfortunately, I have to thank Dr. Ladin.